Can you hear me, Mikey?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Oh,
Oh, okay. I thought there was a bad lag.
there was. My phone froze for a while.
Okay.
I couldn't. I couldn't. Yeah.
All right. Well, seems like it's working all right now.
All right.
And all right. So you had a debate with Cat Hovind. Um, I thought it was one of the better debates. It's hard to keep his attention on anything. Um, but I thought your opening was probably the best opening I've seen against Kent. Um, I I like the approach of like what is the difference between the variation that they accept and like the variation, but like how would you tell the difference between something that's created and something that is related to something else? Because the the amount of differences is the same between them.
You're talking about the differences between kinds.
Well, between any organism, really, it's just like how do you tell the difference between organisms that are similar by design and organisms that are similar by common ancestry? And that'll be my approach, and I
Right. And that's the
partly.
same question I asked. Right. Like that's the same question I asked in my previous debate, or at least distinguish common design apart from common descent. When it's basically the same thing, and you can use both arguments interchangeably. So, like, what method are you using to determine that? So that's what I'm interested in,
Yeah,
and I like that you're using that approach.
yeah, that's I've been kind of, just giving basic evidences, as he would say, in like previous debates because he's kind of masterful in dodging. So this is like the one I've been really looking forward to because I'm like gonna really focus on this tactic, but I'm also gonna like focus on like the standard of reasonable doubt, and that he only has unreasonable doubts, like ridiculous contrivances and stuff like that. And that's part of it. Is like you can't you're using it interchangeably and you can't actually tell the difference. So any doubt you actually have is completely unreasonable. So yeah. Um I was going to just start the review at the discussion portion cuz everyone can just watch the intros.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. We can do that.
Okay. Let me get the chat up to date. I haven't figured out how to integrate the chat completely seamlessly. Creationist joke. How do you piss off an archaeologist? Hand him a tampon and ask him what period it's from. Interesting. Yeah, and don't ask him how old it is either. All right. So, you ready to just jump in?
Oh yeah, we can go in.
All
I'll tell
right.
you from hearing it or not.
All right, let me know if you can hear it and everything. Oh, wait, you probably can't. I didn't check audio. Let me fix that. At least I know what I'm doing wrong. Where's StreamYards? Reshare. Share system audio. Okay, now you should be able to hear it.
In. So we are now going to hand it over to to Dr. Dino himself for his 12-minute opening statement. Whenever you're ready.
We gotta skip through
8 feet
this.
long. I think things were much bigger before the
Nice.
flood when they
I
were
could hear
living longer. This was not millions.
5 minutes for a response.
All right, so let me see.
Was this rebuttals or you going straight into discussion?
I think it sounds like the rebuttal portion. What time is that? I think that's the rebuttal portion.
Okay. Do you want to watch that or skip forward?
Let me see rebuttals. We can go through the discussion. Let's see. I'll be a little past. Yeah, I think we'll start from. Was it like 5? I think it was 5 minutes each, so it would be like 10 minutes afterwards.
Okay.
About 10 minutes.
Best to stick to one topic at a time as we
There we
discuss each of the points in a professional manner. I'll kind of stand back a little bit as moderator to keep you guys free-flowing and organic, and I'll, of course, step in as needed. So let's...
And, of course, the whole Hovind thing of trying to compare, bananas and, like, bananas related to monkeys or pine trees related to dolphins. I think the approach you take
That's what he tried.
Yeah. The approach you take is best. You got to start at what's closest, and that's what he always tries to avoid.
Right, because when you do it that way, when you look at one organism and you try to find the most distantly related or the most distinct organism you can think of, then it's easy to paint the narrative that, oh, look at how different these organisms are. They're obviously not connected, whilst ignoring all the organisms in between that would actually connect them. So that's why I like to do it's pretty much a version of what Aaron Ra does, but I just do it a little bit differently and using different organisms and a slightly different approach.
Yeah. And, and of course, the method he uses to figure out what is related is the same method we use to figure out everything is related, but he just stops at some arbitrary point, and they never explain it. That's the whole frustrating part. So we got to hit the nail on the head that they can't actually explain where they stop using phylogenetic comparisons. And when they actually do, it always ends up making humans in the same kind as chimps.
Considerations for why they get that, and then they have to add these additional assumptions to kind of remove humans from the bracket with chimps and other apes. So, I mean, it's like they can't get a method. I mean, yes, you have to put assumptions in methodologies, but they put so much additional assumptions into it that it kind of undermines the methodology altogether. That's why some creationists have even backed off the methodology thing, and they just go with, you know what, we're going to just use our intuition to determine what a kind is and distinguish them from other kinds. That's it.
Pretty much. All right, let's just play it then.
Have Call Me Emo. Let's have you start us off in this discussion since Kent just ended with his rebuttal. Whatever first points you want to make in a first question, go ahead, gentlemen.
All right, so I know you asked for evidence of like a kind giving rise or giving birth to another kind of organism, but the thing is, no creationist has ever proposed any set of criteria as to what would constitute a change in kind. Now, they have identified different kinds. I know what different kinds look like, but they've never set criteria as to what would constitute a new kind, or how much a kind can diversify before it becomes a new kind.
Okay. I think it's just...
Yeah, I'm really going to have to probably repeat myself a lot because I don't want, like, the main goal is to not let Kent ignore this question.
if you look at the video, you realize that he ignores it completely. He keeps going
Yeah.
on about he keeps showing me different kinds, but I'm not asking him for different kinds. I'm asking him to tell me how diverse must one kind become before they cross over into another kind, right?
Yeah.
I'm wanted to know what would constitute a new kind, because that's what he's asking for. But he keeps talking about different kinds. I don't want to know that.
Yeah, like actual criteria. Of course, like he's never going to actually answer because he can't. But the yeah, the goal is to just expose how much he just needs to avoid this. All right.
It's been pretty well recognized. There are 250 breeds of cattle. I think most 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds would say it's the same kind. So of the 250 types of cattle in the world,
Yeah, 3 and 4-year-olds are the scientific standard, right?
Yeah.
how far is there a limit? How far they can be? You know, man has created most of these through selective breeding to get more milk or more beef or more disease resistance or handle cold climate, or they can select for certain traits that already exist in the cattle gene code. You could never select through natural selection, create a cow with wings. Never going to happen. It's not there. It's not available to choose from. So I'd say, to answer your question, the variations that we've always observed are limited to the same kind. It's still a cow or still corn. I forget how many varieties of corn there are now. It's into the, let's see, how many? 12?
The other problem is to get across that, yeah, it's always going to be nested within the same kind that it came from. A cow's always going to be a cow, no matter how much it changes. But the cows can gain new traits or lose traits. You could get like a snake type cow potentially in a lot of in a few million years, but that's the other thing.
Yeah, it's because I'm trying to ask him what changes would count,
Mm-hmm.
and he keeps trying to tell me that organisms can't diversify into different kinds. I'm not asking him to tell me what he thinks can't happen. I want him to tell me what needs to happen for one kind to become another kind. That's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to ask him. But he keeps going on like, oh, no, organisms can't evolve out of their kinds. Yeah, I know you think that, but I want to know what would count as a change in kind. Beyond what you think can't happen, I know that. But explain to me what changes would I have to show you? Even though you think they can't happen, what changes do I need to show you that would count as one kind becoming another kind? And another thing here is, well, that would pretty much be the entire debate, where he doesn't understand like how names are assigned to clades, labels and clades. So the reason why cows produce cows is because that's the name of the group, or that's the name of the clade. So we assign the name to them. And for them to become non-cows, essentially, we'd have to just change the name, right? But the name change doesn't mean that the organism itself would be very different. All it means that the name would change. So you'll see during the discussion.
Yeah, and I kind of want to focus on, we have, well, he'll never actually give the criteria or requirements, but I'll be focusing on like, well, we have seen all the necessary types of change within kinds to be able to change kinds, right? So even within, like, AIG says mustelids are all the same kind, but within that you basically have enough variation to be able to get what is essentially a seal from a carnivore, and that's considered a different kind. So it's just like, where does it stop? why can't it keep changing?
Right. And that's the same thing I asked in the beginning, is that there are instances where there's more variation within a single kind than there is variation between two neighboring kinds, right? So like there is no objective reason why two kinds, like two similar kinds, can just all be the same kind. and then the kinds closest to them just be the same kind, and then the kinds closest to them all be the same kind, and they keep going until essentially all life would become the same kind.
Yeah.
That's train of thought, or that logic.
Yeah, he's going to want me to try and prove common ancestry of all life. And I'm going to just try and start with a couple of closely related supposed kinds. That's all I really need, because he says it's impossible in the first place. So, and by the same standard, humans are as close to chimps as anything is. So that'll take care of that. Really, all they really object to is that humans are related to anything. I don't think they actually care about anything else. Ready?
1,000 species of corn.
Yeah. So basically, as long as I can like separate humans from apes, or oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Man has created most of them, again, to suit his climate or his certain needs, but it's still corn. It never goes beyond that, never. But in your religion, Mike, you believe corn is related to a whale. Why do you believe?
It's like the more important question is, is it possible for a plant to be related to like single-celled animal precursors in the eukaryotes? But he phrases it as corn related to whale, as if one is a descendant of the other. I think he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, because that's how we think of it. Yeah, because even in his seminars, in his like older seminars, he has like an actual picture of a corn giving birth to a whale and a horse and a few other things. Like that's what they think evolution should be, like corn giving birth to whales, and that's evolution for them. So basically, show them things that would obviously falsify evolution, and that would count as evidence for evolution.
Yep. Yeah, and you can't really argue with someone who just doesn't understand it. But I know some creationists understand this, and they're just hamming it up. It's hard to tell with Kent. But, yeah.
Believe such a thing. We see variations, and they're limited. Always they stop. And there's a limit. But you guys have corn connected back to a corn and a whale connected back to a common ancestor. I resent paying for that to be taught to the kids in school. Go start a private school, teach that to whoever wants to pay and come learn it. But that's not science. There's no evidence of any animal. 300 types of octopus in the world might have had a common ancestor. But you guys want me to believe that's evidence that the octopus and the corn have a common ancestor with the lion and the humans and the dinosaurs.
Or is it possible that octopus have a common ancestor with squid? And then they have a common ancestor with other mollusks, cephalopods.
Right. So you see, that's what he's doing. He's showing like a group, a recognizable group, and then a distinctly different group. Say, look, I don't think those are related. But if you show like the group, like octopus and squid and other mollusks and so on, then it's harder to make that type of argument. And that's the reason why I started off with the bananas and all the organisms that are closely related to bananas, to try to see where that cutoff line is.
Yep. So I'm gonna do like either probably like canines, foxes, and dogs, or the whale evolution, the horse evolution, because that's interesting. That the creationists accept the Mesohippus as a horse, even though it has 3 toes and a different type of skull. But that's like almost identical to the basal tapirs, which are more different than, the modern tapers. So, you're getting a little feedback.
Right.
Uh, yeah, so again, like I want to show how one, the amount of change that they accept can bridge the kinds, because two, the gaps between the kinds are so small that the amount of change that occurs within the kinds can bridge that gap.
Right. Well, a thing I wanted to say before is, you said you're using like fossils and so on. You know that he's going to object with that with the oh, you can't tell a fossil had children and that kind of
Yeah. I mean, there's pregnant fossils and stuff like that. But, I mean, if I'm going to give a few examples, and if he denies them all, it's just like, all right, so if all these are different kinds, then you just don't have any room on the arc anymore. Because that's, like, AIG has grouped all these things in kinds because they have to all fit on the arc somehow. It's not just done out of just for fun.
thing. Right. Another thing I like to do too is actually show fossil kinds where creationists use fossils to determine kinds, showing that Kent's arguments are meaningless to creationists in general. Is just like it's only him, because Standing for Truth and company, they use fossils.
Yep.
As they use fossils to determine kinds. For example, the moment you say Homo sapiens are related to Neanderthals and Denisovans, then you're using fossils as evidence of ancestry, and that you're also using homology as well, using similarities. Because the only way you could know Neanderthal related to modern Homo sapiens is by similarity. It doesn't matter if you found similar DNA sequences in our genome or they have similar anatomy. You're assuming that similarities is evidence of common ancestry right off the bat. Right? So you're kind of making my argument.
Yep, it's just an inconsistently applied standard.
These lines on paper are pure propaganda. They're absolute bold-faced lie. Okay?
Go ahead, Iman.
All right. So you're talking about the cows, for example. So the reason why cows or cattle only produce cattle is because that's the name we assign to them. If you want to see a cattle produce a non-cattle, it's just a matter of name reassignment. You talk about corn being related to corn, but do you know that corn and bamboo and sugarcane and rice are all classified in the same kind by creationist biologists?
I'm not sure I heard the question clearly. Are what all the same kind by creationists? The cattle?
No, I'm saying like corn, rice.
Yeah, he doesn't really pay attention. Because he's just got his canned responses all the time.
Right. And when I ask the questions, my questions are not. I tailor my questions specifically so he doesn't. He's not able to answer it using his script. So I would deliberately formulate the question, knowing that he doesn't have a script to answer that question. That's the reason why I kind of ask questions in a certain way. So you realize that every time I ask him a question, kind of throws him off. Kind of, that's your religion, or there's just no evidence for this. Like, he doesn't have the script. The script responses are not applicable to the questions asked.
Yeah, like this is the most important part of the debate, is just getting him to either completely dodge or somehow acknowledge this question. I'm going to be talking about, like in my intro, I'm going to talk about ERVs and like the multicellular algae. But those are just like, well, at least the algae will be more of like an evidence of what kind of change can occur within a kind that we've observed. And then I'll focus on ERVs for a little bit, because like the discussion portion, the way this debate series is set up is like 30 minutes. So that's like nothing. So I'm just going to like use ERVs to basically just, I don't know. It's just kind of to throw a big number at them essentially, because it's just so unlikely. But it's such a simple point. It doesn't need to be harped on very long, because he has no rebuttal to it, and it's just about getting that human and chimp thing it's impossible, mathematically impossible, that we're not related, and that he only has unreasonable doubts. So that's the other goal of the debate, is to show every response he has just increases in ridiculousness. So like by the legal standard, like evolution is proven beyond reasonable doubts. But this point that you're making is actually what I'm more interested in, personally. But as far as the question of the debate, is there reasonable evidence? You can prove that pretty quickly, and I'm going to throw that in there, but again, just focusing really on this type of discussion.
Well, with respect to the ERVs, right? Now, they don't actually have, well, they have a rebuttal question, not necessarily rebutting the evidence itself, but they have like a few questions they ask, and they have like an alternative explanation they use. So usually the question they ask, this is Standing's question, by the way. He'd ask if we have evidence of, if you've ever seen an ERV, because some ERVs seem to have function. He'd ask if you've ever seen an ERV go from non-functional to functional, right? So that's pretty much the question they asked, to kind of throw you off. But the thing is, the question itself is formulated bad, because retroviruses themselves can have the same functions that are assigned to ERVs are also associated with retroviruses. So
yep,
a retrovirus doesn't have to go from non-functional to functional. It could just retain whatever function it had when it was a retrovirus, and then when it becomes endogenous, lose its viral abilities and then keep the other functions, right? And their alternative explanation for ERVs is just pretty much that's the way the designer designed it. So say that you're designing cars, you would put similar systems in similar places, because apparently that works, right? So that's their argument.
Yeah.
But the thing is about that argument is the designer could put them in different places as well.
Yep.
Right. Remember, ERVs is the distribution of the ERVs that is evidence for common ancestry, not just that they exist. Right?
Yeah.
So the mere fact that the distribution is consistent with common descent, that's actually stronger evidence for common descent, because another arrangement, it would still be consistent with common design, but inconsistent with common descent. So basically, our model is more precise in that aspect.
Yeah, and it's unreasonable to give that excuse, because obviously a designer who wanted us to believe that humans and chimps are separate would never do that, because he would know that it would be confusing. And yeah, it's not just what it is, but where it is. That's so important.
Bamboo and sugarcane.
Yeah. In the grass family, there's quite a variety. I'm not sure exactly how we should classify that. People still argue about exactly what's a different kind. There are hundreds of varieties of bamboo.
And he's so vague, he doesn't even bother to study like what creationist organizations consider to be the same kinds, because he doesn't want to be nailed down on any of them.
Yeah. So it's like, I would show him a kind and he would like, are they the same kind? Could they do that? Like, yeah, creationists already accept that they do that. So, okay.
He's like, just like...
He's surprised by creationist evidence. Because all the evidence I give, like, for kinds, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he's just like, yeah, maybe not. Moving on.
maybe even thousands of varieties. But if you just stick with the cow example you started with, you said if we give it a different name, it's now a different kind. Okay, let's call the white and black one at the top a frog. There, we got evolution. We changed it to white and black. Now it's a frog because I gave it a different name.
Where he wasn't.
No, it's still a cow.
Were you saying something?
You see where he's not listening? I didn't say that cows, if you change a different kind. I said if you want a non-cow, you change the name and you just call it by a different name. So he's now, because I think he's listening, but he's not understanding. So then that's why he's confusing my argument. But I would explain it for.
Uh-oh, I think you're cutting out. Are you muted? Yeah, you might have muted yourself right there.
Oh, I mute myself for a while. Yeah, what I was saying is that he wasn't listening to when I said that if you want to get a non-cow, you just change the name. I didn't say that changing the name is going to give you a different kind. So, but
Oh, you did it again. Yeah, you were saying that just because you rename it doesn't make it a different kind, right?
that changing the name is going to be a different kind. Let's say if you change a name, then you can call it by a different name. Essentially, he is the one that has to tell me what would constitute a new kind. I wouldn't know that.
Yeah, and kind of in reality, more what we do is once there is a big enough difference, then we change the name. And, that's how it works. All right.
Zebus, bison, yak, buffalo might have all had a common ancestor. I don't know. Doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. He doesn't care. He's just trying to be vague. That's the tactic.
I think they probably did. I think whether they're still interfertile, I don't know. God might have made 10 different kinds of cows, and now there's 250. But they're still cow. So to see the 12,000 varieties of corn and see, wow, that proves corn and cows are related. I'll just ask you that simple question. Do you believe corn and cows are related to a common ancestor?
Right. So before I answer that question, let me get back to the cows one. What I was saying is that if you want a cow to produce a non-cow, then you change the name. It's just a name reassignment, right? I don't know what would constitute a new kind because there is no criteria given for how diverse organisms must become before they pass that threshold for where a kind ends and where one begins. I don't know that. So I won't be able to show you that. You would have to.
Yeah, because you could say, like by Kent's vague criteria, you could say, well, a buffalo is different from a cow because a buffalo is a buffalo and a cow is a cow. And that's all he's really giving. Like his criteria is a name change. We can't tell whether he would accept the differences between cows and buffaloes or if he would say that they're different kinds. He even said he doesn't care.
Right. It's like, to me, it's as long as the organisms are called by the, I don't know. It's so confusing because I don't even think they themselves know what a kind is. Because that's what the reason why I asked them the question. I said, if a pig evolved wings, would that change count as a change in kind, right? or would it not because it's still called a pig,
Yeah.
right? Well, I didn't get an answer to that question, but that's what I'm trying to find out. Like, what change would count as a new kind, and not the name, but they're so fixed on names of organisms. Like, try to. Sometimes I try to, like, when I'm speaking to people about, like, visiting Earth, and you have no idea what these organisms are called, right? So now we're trying to find out how much different these organisms must become before you accept that it's a macro change. So let's ignore that organisms even have names, and let's pretend we don't know their names, and let's see what change would count, because they're so fixed on the names. You show them some change and say, oh well, it's still a plant. Yeah, I know, plant is just a name given to a group of organisms with some set of characteristics. Let's imagine we don't know it's a plant. We haven't named the plants yet. We haven't named the organisms. What change would count? That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, and the problem with naming species is that there actually is no real separation because it's a continuum.
To provide that criteria and then identify it, because that's not something we do.
No. Okay.
Creation is identified. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. No, I'll get to the question. Yeah.
Okay. Do you believe cows have ever produced a non-cow?
Right. So cows would not produce non-cows unless somebody reassigns the name to them. Just like the wild mustards only produced wild mustards until someone reassigned the name broccoli, and then reassigned the name cabbage, reassigned the name cauliflower, and so on.
Or reassign the name bison.
Okay. This chart shows corn and octopus having a.
Were you going to add something there?
Oh no, I'm just saying, like, it's every time I would give him an example of organisms changing their names, which is what he's asking for, and he like completely ignores that, and then comes back with the same argument. And that's the reason why we keep going over the same thing over and over again, because no matter how many times I would correct the misconception, he comes back with the same argument, right?
Yeah, he doesn't have real conversations, really. Yeah. And I'm trying to keep an eye on your little microphone, so every time you unmute, I'll, like, pause or something. Just so you know.
Common ancestor, which was an amoeba. So apparently the amoeba produced something that was non-amoeba trillions of times to change it to an octopus. Where's the evidence of an amoeba ever producing a non-amoeba?
And that's the thing, is it's not a non-amoeba, it's a modified amoeba. And if you get enough modifications, it's not going to look like an amoeba anymore. But it's an amoeba by ancestry.
Right, it's like he doesn't understand how clades work, so it's very difficult to even explain how the changes he's asking for. It's difficult to explain that to him if he doesn't even understand, like, the basics of evolution. So then we have to keep going back a step, So I would explain something, and then he comes back and says, okay, let me go back a step and explain how clades work. And then he's progressing and comes back with the same argument. Now I have to go back another step, explain how clades work. So that's why the discussions seem to have, like, been stagnant around just the clades and name resistance. And then it comes back clades, name resistance.
Yeah, and I don't know, you kind of have to assume he's just being dishonest, because that's what, like, even if he's not intending to be, that's what he's doing. He's not like a someone who actually doesn't understand evolution is going to be, like, acting confused by what you're saying, but he's just, like, brushing it off and going back to the script. Like, he's not actually trying to understand or engage. So you have to treat it like like it looks.
Oh, yeah, oh, he wouldn't. I doubt he would want to look. You see, he wants to save face, right? He wants to give this appearance that he knows it all and he can take care of himself in any debate. So even if he clearly doesn't understand what you're saying, you try to make a response just to show that, hey, I can respond to what you just said, even if what he's saying doesn't actually respond to what you're saying. He just wants to show his audience that I can make a response to that. I don't really understand it, but I'm going to respond anyway.
Yeah. He has to keep up the confidence.
Right. Again, we're back to the name assignment. So I gave an example of this with brassica already, where wild mustards produce things that are no longer called wild mustards. But that's how it happens through name assignment.
Our kale and broccoli came from the wild mustard plant. They are still the same kind. They're still a plant. They're still a green plant. They're still mostly unable to survive on their own. You have to babysit them, plant them all in the field, and watch over the field. Most of them, if you turned them all loose, within a few hundred years, they'd all revert back to the wild mustard. That's probably the only one that survived. It's like the Chihuahuas we have, the 99 here, Alt-DV. There are now 339 recognized breeds of dogs. Most of them wouldn't survive out in the woods for 2 days. Man has created them for our pleasure, either for hunting or for comfort or to be a lap dog or guard dog. But as far as surviving on their own, like the wolf, most of them couldn't do it. So the fact that we gave it a new name and call it dog instead of wolf or coyote, it's still the same kind of animal. But it's not my burden to have to prove that, Mike. It's your burden to prove where's the evidence of a dog ever producing a non-dog. You said a cow can't produce a non-cow, but yet you believe an amoeba did produce a non-amoeba. I mean, that's what the chart shows. Let's see, right there. Everything.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's like he is saying that I need to prove that, right? But every time I try to give evidence of that kind of thing, his response is, "Oh, but it's still this, it's still that." I'm like, that's the reason why I have to keep explaining this over and over to you, because every time I try to give you evidence, your scripted response is, "Oh, but it's still a this, or it's still a that." So I'm trying to correct that script, that response you have, and then we could progress the discussion by me giving you actual evidence revolution.
Yeah, and it's like, well, by naming convention, a wolf has produced a non-wolf, and of course, somehow, human selection is fundamentally different in his mind than natural selection, even though it's just a different type of selection. But the biology is all the same principles. And I just wonder if he would accept if foxes come from canines, or are the same canine kind as wolves. But he wouldn't answer that, actually. He would just say maybe. Because, of course, you could always nail him on the different chromosome numbers. Although foxes themselves have different chromosome numbers, so maybe that's a good way to go.
Yeah, so he has a thing where it's basically he doesn't know what a kind is, but he'll know it when he sees it, kind of thing. It's like, I don't really know what a kind is, but I'll know it if you show it to me. So I don't know I'm not going to tell you what a kind is or what would count as a new kind, but show me what you got and I'll tell you. I don't know what you're looking for. You don't say, and it seems like you would just shift your goalposts whenever needed. If I show you some kind of change, you just say, "Oh well, yeah, I know it's a lot of change, but it's still a this or it's still a that."
Yeah, and the audience goes off the same basic criteria, like, oh, that sounds right to me. I'll know it when I see it. And, they just need someone to reaffirm that for them. But if we can get them to at least think about the questions, that could at least maybe start some gears in some people's brains.
Sorry. The amoeba would produce offspring that would vary from the parent, right? But
Within limits.
I'm sorry.
Within limits, it's still an amoeba. I don't know how many varieties of amoeba there are, but it'd still be a single-celled organism. Where's the evidence of an amoeba producing a 2-celled or a 3-celled? Because octopus have a whole lot more than 2 cells.
Yeah, where are the limits? That's the entire point.
Yeah, just interjected and said there's a limit, and the limit is it's still going to be an amoeba. So basically, it's still going to be called by the same name. See what I mean?
Yeah.
There is
Right,
no
so-
evidence for an amoeba changing to anything other than amoeba. Go ahead.
Right. So there are experiments to show that single cell organisms can evolve into multicellular organisms. That has been demonstrated. But I'm saying the amoeba producing a non-amoeba, that wouldn't happen. It's just what happens is the amoeba would produce offspring that would vary, and then someone would come retroactively reassign the name of the organism. That's what happened with wild mustard. So wild mustards changed until someone decided, oh, this wild mustard seems a bit different to its ancestors. I'm going to reassign the name. I'm going to call it broccoli. So that's how it happens.
I think you'll find they took the wild mustard plant, and through selective breeding, they decided what they wanted. They wanted more seeds, more leaf, more stem, more deeper roots, able to handle the cold better. That's what happened with the dogs. Somebody decided, I want dogs with long, thick hair so they can survive the cold up in Alaska. And they crossed them until they got a husky. They survived.
And so why can't that happen with whales, where like a Pachycetus can get less hair, flatter tail, smaller hind legs, and more webbing in their front hands? Basically, that's all you need to make a whale. In a nutshell. I don't know why Kent is so hung up on human selection over natural selection. It's just a talking point so he can distract.
Right. Oh, what I was going to say. Just forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, usually when it comes to like the big changes, they'll respond with something like, "Oh, do you know how many changes you need to get this to this or whatever?" And that's the reason why I started up the way I started up, by explaining that complex coordinated changes can happen. That's actually how it happens. I think it's referred to as mosaic evolution, where you have like a suite of changes happening in concert. Even in a single generation, you just get a suite of changes. So that's the reason why I started out that way.
Just fine up there.
Yeah, a lot of traits kind of piggyback on one another. And like his argument that they would revert back to wild type is usually not true. It's much harder for things to revert, and like this has been studied a lot. Even when you mutate the same genes and the adaptive mutations will like fix the genes, you still can't revert back to the original form of the gene, even though the new one is functional. And like with bacteria, you can get them back to wild fitness, but they'll still retain the newly evolved resistances or citrate digestion, things like that.
Right. So I know what he's talking about. Usually the daughter population, right? If you bring them back to the parent population, they kind of blend back into the population because of the larger gene pool of the parent population, right? That can happen. It's not necessarily quote unquote reverting. Is that the traits of the daughter population kind of quote unquote absorb back into the parent population. So you no longer see that variant because they're kind of drowned by the weight of the parent population. I know what you're talking about, but just like leaving them out on their own and thinking that they would revert back to the wild type, nah, that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, especially if there's actual mixing, that you can definitely erase the acquired traits. But as far as just going back into the wild, like they would basically just be going back to having the same selection pressures, and so you'd get similar traits. Like there's all these types of crustaceans that all end up turning into crabs, basically, even though they're not true crabs.
Right.
You bring the huskies
So-
down to the
And I think there was a question like that in the Q&A where someone wanted to ask if a poodle can evolve back into a wolf or something. And usually creationists think that the reason for that is they somehow lost their wolf genes, so they can't go back. And it's not a case of losing genes. It's a case of they've modified their genes. Now they become a poodle. And if you want them to revert back into a wolf, the only way that would happen is if you kind of reverse engineer every single change that took place, so without introducing any new change. And that would be impossible to revert all those changes without having any new ones being introduced.
Yeah, and on the genetic level, definitely. And then, yeah, like you said, you could phenotypically revert some of those traits, but new traits would piggyback on that, and so you would never be able to get exactly the same. Like maybe they'd always be curly or something like that.
desert, they don't do very well. They got too much hair.
Oh, you're gonna say something else? Nope. All right.
thick body, they can't get rid of heat fast enough, they would suffer in the heat. Whereas if you take a dog like a dingo or a greyhound, thin fur, short fur, long legs, skinny body, they do really well in the heat. They couldn't survive Alaska, but they could survive Arizona, but they're still a dog. Somebody selected that. They didn't select it on their own. Now, if you turned all the dogs loose in Alaska, probably only those that have that already existing thick fur coat would survive. Next year, they get to make the puppies for the next generation. And after a couple of years of that, you're going to have all dogs that look like a husky or a wolf. That's the only kind that survives up there. That's not evolution. That's not creating anything new. It's still a dog. But you have to see from these charts, the amoeba did produce something that was non-amoeba. Actually, it produced everything. And yet amoeba.
So what if you turned the dogs loose in like a primarily water environment, or where all the food was in the water? Would they start looking more like otters or seals? That's what he's ignoring.
And I realized like I had a missed opportunity there. I should have pressed him on what he means by new,
Yeah.
quote unquote new, because evolution is primarily like a modification kind of thing. So it would be interesting for him to tell me what is new exactly. Yeah, and then I would show him like modified things and show him how evolution worked by modification. So what you're asking for is not necessarily evolution. You're asking for something else.
Yeah, they kind of sneak in all this language. Because if you had to nitpick everything they said, we'd be here all day.
Amoeba are still having babies today, and we don't see anything in the laboratory. We don't see anything in nature of them ever doing anything to make more baby amoebas. So this is why I say evolution is imagination. It is SpongeBob. Imagine it happened. It's not science. Go ahead.
Right. So again, the amoeba only produces amoeba because that's the name we chose to call them and their offspring. It's what you're talking about is name assignment. That's what you're actually talking about, because it doesn't matter how much the organisms change. The name doesn't have to change. For example, let's say, for example, hypothetical scenario, if pigs evolve wings, would that count as a macroevolutionary change, or would it not count because they're still pigs?
If elephants could fly, what would that prove? They can't fly. You're talking about a nonsense question here. Pigs don't have wings. Now, could it be
hypothetical question?
Sure. Well, could it be that if an animal in its past, the ancestors used to have wings, maybe an emu? We've got emus here. They got little tiny wings, seem to be pretty useless. Maybe they used to be bigger in the past, and they're slowly losing them because they don't use them. Could be, I don't know. Still a wing, but it's not adding information, it's losing. If the pig had wings millions of years ago, like you guys believe, and it lost them, and you were able to regrow them, I'd like to see the thing fly. We got some pigs here. You can barely pick them up, let alone fly. So I think it's a nonsense hypothetical question. They don't have wings. Pigs always produce pigs.
No,
I didn't look at it. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So he dodges the hypothetical in order to gain what his criteria are.
Right. So he he knows he can't answer the question, right? Because if you answer the question, then it would show that the name is not important. Because that's what I'm trying to get him off of, the silly name argument, right? So then we can get off this name thing. And secondly, I don't know if you noticed that he kind of gets what like vestigial structures. He kind of gets it, what they are, and how there would be evidence that the organism once had it in the past. What's the name of the phenomenon where organisms kind of revert back to their ancestral state? Like you would see a whale, like a dolphin born with a knee joint, or you would see.
Oh yeah.
What's the name of that phenomenon?
Yeah, I can look that up real quick. But you see that phenomenon in Evo Devo. Well, sort of.
Right, you see that in Evo Devo.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to say it's like it starts with a P. Shoot, yeah. I know I've got it somewhere around here. I'll find that. I'll tell you.
All
Like
right.
when the dolphins get the extra fins.
Atavism.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's
I
atavism.
think so. Yeah. Yeah, so that didn't
Let me
start with a
revert back
P.
to your- Yeah.
I'm talking about the changes between them. I'm asking if, like, a pig, as we know them, if they evolve wings, if that change would count as a macroevolutionary change, or would it not count as a macroevolutionary change because it's still called a pig? So, does a name mean anything, or is it change we're talking about?
Well, the name's already changed from language to language. What we call
What
call
tabs
dog,
did-
the Mexicans
okay.
call perro. Did that change it to something else? No, it's the language changed. So changing the name is not going to do anything for it. It's still the same animal. Let's see, there are 300 varieties of pigs worldwide. I think they all produce pigs. I just Googled it. So I don't think you're going to get one with wings, no.
No, again, that was just a hypothetical question. Because what I'm
Right.
trying to find out is what change would count as a change in kind, and not the name of the organism. So I'm not interested in, like, this organism is called an amoeba, or it's called a dog, or it's called a cow. I'm interested in what either a physiological or genetic change would count as a macroevolutionary change. But I'm not interested in the name change, because you can always reassign names to organisms, as we did with the broccoli. But you said that wouldn't count as a macroevolutionary change. So we need to know what change would count. Because I can show you change, but then I don't know what would count.
He's looking for the next slide to bring up.
Yeah, he is. Oh boy, because and I keep driving the same argument. I'm asking for the change. What change would count? And he keeps on, and he's still going to go back to the same name thing. I'm not interested in what organisms are called. That's what we do so we can identify organisms. But that is not necessary in understanding how organisms change. So that's what I want to know. What change would count?
Yeah, or like how much change needs to be there before we should start calling it by a different name.
At least to you, or to creationists, what would count as a macroevolutionary change, because that criteria has not yet been given.
Yeah, I think you're asking a question that doesn't have a logical answer. Nobody's ever seen this happen. Science deals with what we can observe and study. Show me an example that has happened where an animal produced something that you think is a different kind and deserves a different name and would count as macroevolution. The burden of proof's on you, not me. I don't know of any. I don't think anybody's ever seen any. But if you know of one, I'd like to see it. It's imagination. We don't see it happen. I don't think it can happen, so I can't give you an example of one.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to show you that because I don't know what would count as a new kind of organism. I can show you what macroevolution is as defined by biologists, which would be speciation. But I know creationists don't use macroevolution in that way. So I have to show you macroevolution in the context you're using it in, not in the context I'm using it in, right? But that word macroevolution, as you use it, it is undefined. It has no criteria. So then I don't know what to show you.
Okay. The charts in the school textbooks, like the one I have on screen here, show every living thing, plants and animals, all of them came from a common ancestor, an amoeba. So the amoeba did outgrow its clade, that's for sure. If it turned into a dinosaur and a pig and a bear, it did. We don't see any of this. They drew lines on paper connecting, let's see, the corn to the lion, to the whale, to the dinosaur, and humans, back to an amoeba. Where's the evidence of an amoeba producing a non-amoeba? You got to start there, because you believe everything came from it. So if you can't outgrow your clade, as you said, apparently they did. All of them did.
But that's not even how the theory of evolution was created. We didn't start with saying amoebas created all of life. We started with, at least Darwin started with, well, these finches are related to other finches, and maybe those finches are related to other birds. And look at that. Birds seem to look like some dinosaurs, and then we filled in some of the gaps there. And the theory started working for other closely related things, like Linnaeus did a lot of the groundwork, because it's like, well, now Darwin's theory fits into all of the trees that Linnaeus laid out, but it always starts with the closest organisms and the most modern organisms going down to the older versus going down up from the oldest to the modern forms. Kent's trying to do it backwards as usual.
Yeah, so, and in addition, you realize that even after I corrected him on the amoeba thing, he's back on the same argument. So then now I have to correct it again, right? Oh boy. You can go ahead.
All right.
You're saying we can't now? That would fit the biblical definition. They're going to bring forth after their kind. Instead of all this being one family tree, I think there's probably 8,000 different trees. There's a tree of pigs and a tree of corn and a tree of cows, but they don't go back to touch each other ever. They've always been pigs, cows, or corn, or people. We've never seen any change. We see some pretty wild variations within that kind. I think there's 1,100 varieties of apples. Man has created most of them. Some get more juice. Some can handle the heat better. Some can handle the cold better. Some are crispier or sweeter, whatever. But they're still apple. They're limited to the same kind. Still an apple. Excuse me. Go ahead.
All right. So with the clades thing, let me explain what's going on. So you said you showed a whale. I think I'm seeing a dinosaur, corn, and humans. They all belong to the eukaryotic clade, right? And what happens is when clades, can you hear me? Right. I think you're on. Sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Actually, because you're on mute, can you repeat the last maybe 3 seconds of what you were saying?
Okay. The eukaryote simply.
Well, wasn't he kind of interrupting you in the middle of that point? I think SFT's being showing his bias a little bit there.
Oh, if you look at the entire debate carefully, every time Standing interjects is when Kent finishes his statements. Not when I finish. So Kent always gets the last word before Standing comes in.
Yeah.
You can check it if you want. Yeah.
Yes. He looks up to him because he's quite a role model, right?
Means the cell has a nucleus bound in a membrane. That doesn't prove any relationship. I'd say we could classify all the cars in the world by those that have an engine in front and those that have an engine in the back. Does that prove anything? No. Just a design. The fact that plants have a eukaryote, man considers them a eukaryote. I don't think the plants care what we call them. But
if cars
right.
could...
So I hate this.
Go ahead.
I hate this particular argument. This is a specialty of him, and John Maddox likes to use that argument. The reason for the difference in logic that applies to organisms and cars is because they're capable of producing descendants. Organisms are capable. So common descent is only applied to things capable of producing descendants. That's the reason why we assume common descent among organisms and not with cars. This is so simple. I don't know why they don't get it, right? Simple. Cars don't have descendants. We don't apply common descent. Organisms have descendants. Then we're warranted to assume common descent. That's it. There is no reason to make the comparison when there's an obvious difference between them that would justify a different application of logic. Yes, we know there are, if you want to call them machines, fine. You want to call organisms machines, cars machines, fine. The differences between these machines is one is capable of descent, producing descendants, and one is not. So then my logic, or at least the way I basically the logic of common descent is only applicable to one because they have the capability of producing descendants. That should be very easy to understand. They just never get it.
Yeah, and I think most of them know, especially with this car point. But it's just a way to say some kind of response and then kind of change the subject a little bit, because then we have to correct them on the cars, and then, the original point is lost and they can move on.
We put pine trees, are you?
A good way to respond to that argument is just ask them a simple question. Are Homo sapiens related to Neanderthals, right? They would answer yes, most likely. I ask them, what gives you the justification for assuming that these things share common ancestry? Right? They would say similarities and whatever. And you could bring up the car argument. They say, but cars have similarities. Why don't we assume that cars are related? And they would actually answer the question for you. Cars can't produce descendants. Because many times I have arguments with creationists on the internet, and then they ask them that question in that kind of way, and they would answer the question like, "Wait, you understand why we don't assume ancestry with cars? So then why do you keep trying to criticize me when I do the same?" I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Eukaryotes, so are humans. So you could classify things by, are they affected by gravity or not? Well, yeah, everything's affected by gravity. Oh, therefore they're all related. The fact that they've all got a cell with a cell nucleus bound in a membrane is not evidence they're related. It's a great design that works. I think somebody smart designed it.
Well, it's evidence that they could have come from a common ancestor, because if you go back far enough, they're so similar that they're only separated by tiny changes. Oh, and we lost Emo again. He'll probably be back pretty soon. But yeah, the point is, first you have to start off. There he is. Yeah, I was just saying that you have to recognize that when you have shared traits, all that separates the two organisms is small microevolutionary changes. So, that establishes that evolution is possible. Then the fossil record and the ability to predict the fossil record is what really confirms not only that it's possible, but that it did happen.
Right. The ability to predict makes it even stronger evidence for common ancestry. But what's even better is that evolution doesn't only predict what we would find; it can also predict what we would not find. Right? Creationists don't have that luxury of predicting what we shouldn't find. They have no grounds for making that prediction. So it's like, if you have a die, and I predict it's going to land on a 2, and it's not going to land on 1, 4, 5 things, right? I can predict that. But creationists with their model, they would predict that the dice would fall on a 2 or a 3 or a 4, but they can't predict that it wouldn't fall on anything. So the differences between our models is that we can make more precise predictions. We can make predictions on the same things, yes, but our predictions are always more precise because then we can predict X and then we can predict not Y. I can predict that we would find ERVs distributed in this way, and I can also predict that we would never find them distributed in that way. But they don't have any grounds for making those kinds of predictions. So that's why when it comes to evaluating which model best explains a particular set of data, evolution always comes up being the one making the more precise prediction.
And any predictions they make are not novel. Like, oh, some ERVs might have a function. Well, that's not exactly a creationist exclusive prediction. And dogs will produce dogs. Also, not a novel prediction. We already know that. They can only accommodate evidence. They can't actually come up with the first predictions that no one else came up with before them.
Yeah, because the model is so inclusive. Like anything is with their model, so they have no way to make those kinds of predictions. Because evolution works in a specific way, then we can make those kind of predictions, but they can't. Because even if they make a prediction and it so happens that the result is completely opposite, it will still be consistent with the model. So like, it doesn't even make sense if they even try making predictions.
Right. So I'm not. What I'm trying to do is explain how clades work. So you don't outgrow your clade, but instead you make new clades. So clades is akin to a branch on a tree or a twig, where every twig remains rooted to the branch from whence it came, and then new twigs can sprout from that one, and so on and so on. So, for example, if you start with canids, as we're trying to explain, you have canids, and then from that canid clade, you have Canis lupus, and then from that Canis lupus clade, you have Canis lupus familiaris, and then from that Canis lupus familiaris clade, you have Canis lupus familiaris dachshund or Canis lupus familiaris Great Dane, right? So what's happening is each time a clade comes around, an additional name is added. So you just keep adding names on top names. But because we don't call organisms by all their clade names, no one goes around saying, "Oh, that's a nice Canis lupus familiaris poodle." We just say it's a poodle, right? So that's what happens. We don't call them by all their clade names. But if we were, then we would go around when we see a human, we would say, "Oh, that's a eukaryotic, chordate," and we would just call all the clade names until we get to humans. So the clades is not changing. What's happening? More clades are being added.
So we should be called the amoeba, protista, sponge, vertebrate, Homo sapien. We should have. Do you believe you're related to a protista? Should we? Is that my point? Is you can believe that. That's not science. That's what I can't get you guys to understand, because we see protista are still producing protista babies.
Well, we are, regardless of if we're related or not. We are eukaryotic. We are chordates. We are animals. We are primates and mammals. Whether we're related to the others or not, it's just that, within primates, there's enough possible variation that it's possible that a primate can evolve into a human. And indeed, this assumption predicts the fossil record, and the fossil record backs that up.
Simple. And if you notice, like, instead of him acknowledging that he understands the explanation I gave, he just goes off on a tangent. And do you believe that you're related to an amoeba or a protista? Like, could you just acknowledge that I just explained something to you, acknowledge that you understand, and so on? That's how conversations go, right? So it's like, just acknowledge that I explained something to you, but he doesn't want to acknowledge that. He wants to pretend that I didn't explain that clades don't produce, that clades don't change, but in fact that they just give rise to new ones that remain rooted to the original clade.
Yeah, it's not like a logical conversation. He always like restarts everything.
That's all they ever do. Amoebas produce amoebas. Bacteria produce bacteria. There are no exceptions, none. But yet you wish to believe and imagine that this bacteria or protista somehow, over millions of generations, added more information and turned into a human. Because the books do show humans coming from protista.
Because each species is able to produce children different enough that you can make new species, which can bridge gaps between other potential species.
That's not science. That's all. I wish you guys would have just admit it and called it a religion and be happy. Start the Church of the Amoeba. That's fine. Go there. Sing, blessed assurance, the amoeba is mine, I can make a lot of songs for you, modify our songs in our songbook, make all kinds of songs about the amoeba. Praise to the amoeba, almighty amoeba. You don't see, I don't think, Mike, you do believe they grow out of their clade. The amoeba that finally...
Yeah, so he likes to do this thing where he kind of tries to ridicule his opponents in a way, like ridicule their position. But I will try my best, like, not to even engage in that kind of thing. So I know it's gonna take up time, and we don't have much of it. So you just say something, I'll just either smile it off, laugh it off, or just ignore it. So you just,
Yeah. He deserves it, but there's not much time.
They became two-celled. Did it grow out of its clade and become three-celled, and then four-celled and multicellular? We see single-celled creatures work together as a colony. We've never seen a two-celled creature. It's usually a colony working together for some reason. Sometimes.
Yeah, we've seen like 8-celled creatures coming from single-celled creatures. But that's kind of shows, I do think he is intentionally dishonest a lot, but I don't think he understands a lot either, because he literally thinks that evolution has to go from 1 cell to 2 cells to 3 cells to 4 and 5 and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think like a lot of creationists have that kind of view too. Like, and this is how they would do it, right? They would say, oh, this organism is made up of how many trillion cells? How long would it take for an organism to reach that amount? And they would start with, let's see, if it takes 1 generation to go from 1 to 2, and then 2 to 4, and they would say, oh, there's not enough time for organisms to evolve. I'm like, no, evolution doesn't say that organisms would go like 1 to 2 cell to 3 cell, 4 cell. You can have like a jump in cells. You can have like for example, you can have like 1 billion cells more than your parents because you're larger than them, right? So you have like 1 billion cells more than them. That's a big jump in 1 generation. I don't think they understand that.
Yeah, and cells naturally just divide. You kind of have to have mechanisms to tell them when to stop dividing. So that's not a problem.
And another thing too is him and this thing with it's not a multicellular organism, it's a colony. A multicellular organism is a colony, so I'm not sure what he's talking about. But it's not, what he's talking about is like cells coming together, like separate cells coming together and forming a unit, like a colony. The experiments that I was talking about is organisms, like cells dividing, but they're not separating. So they divide, but they would remain as a unit, just like true multicellular organisms. And then they have their own specialized cells that would branch off and make another unit. But it's not like they're separated and coming together. It's they divide but remain together. That's the difference.
Yeah, they have a genetically locked number of cells. I think it's 8 cells. And it's all 8-celled individuals, and they have different cells within them. So you can't divide them up, and they're not self-sufficient individuals that are just stuck together. They are, all those 8 cells creates an individual, and it has like basic tissue differentiation where some cells are reproductive, others are not.
Right. And that's the definition of a multicellular organism.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what he's getting at, but I didn't really harp on that argument too much. I just wanted to get the clades thing out of the way, and then we can get on to
Yeah.
actually presenting it.
Well, but that's a great rebuttal to the argument of, well, this information was preloaded in the organism because no, we can genetically test that this particular genotype was not in the populations before we subjected them to evolution. It arose after the selection began. It is actual mutations to that we know which specific genes and which mutations occurred.
The thing about this preloaded information thing is not only are they arguing that organisms were front loaded with some pool of genes that then was divided, they also argue, especially when you're arguing with John Madoff, that organisms they were pre-programmed with the ability to produce more genes and produce more things. So they're pre-programmed to mutate. They're pre-programmed to produce what?
Pre-programmed to evolve.
There's no. Yeah, you can basically pre-program anything in an organism. Because I had a discussion with him, and I was trying to find out when he talks about pre-programming, what is the limit? How much can be pre-programmed? And I'm trying to understand his argument, because he has a way of. I'm talking about John, right? He has a way of not really explaining his point, but mainly kind of interrogating you on your position. So you ask yourself a question. I'm like, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I'm trying to understand your position. So you're saying that organisms were somehow built in, preloaded, and then they diversify. And he was like, no, organisms also have the ability to produce new stuff. I'm like, all right. So they have the ability, they are preloaded, and they also have the ability to produce. So basically, any organisms can be related that way, because then there is no limit to what can and cannot be pre-programmed, right?
Yep. All right. Well, I've got about 15 or 20 more minutes here, so let's see if we can get through this.
A whole bunch of them, but they're all individual amoeba or single-celled creatures. They never join like ours do, where my heart is dependent on my lungs, which is dependent on the nervous system, which is dependent on, it's interconnected in a way that no group, no colony of cells ever gets connected that way.
Right.
Well, like we said, the multicellular algae are interconnected and dependent on each other already. And it's pretty simplistic compared to a whole system, but the other thing is endosymbiosis, is there's species that can't survive with the species of amoeba that can't survive with the bacteria inside them, and an almost identical species which cannot survive without being infected by the exact same bacteria.
Yeah, and there's also experiments where I actually showed it in my opening, where they've shown that endosymbiosis, an actual experiment that shows that organisms without basically they had an algae, I think, and a ciliate, and then it engulfed the ciliate, and then after a few generations they become dependent on they both become dependent on each other, so you can't separate them. So true endosymbiosis.
Yeah, the dependencies have been observed to evolve in real time, and all it takes is just compatibility, and then you lose some parts that make those original parts independent. So it's really not it's not impossible at all.
So with respect to outgrowing the clades, so as I said, the clades, you don't outgrow them, you grow new ones. So it's like a branch that grows a twig, and then the twig grows another twig. So every twig remains rooted to the twig it came from, and that remains rooted to the branch it came from, and then the branch remains rooted to the stem it came from, and so on. So you're never outgrowing it, you're just sprouting new ones. That was happening. So the eukaryote clade would sprout new clades, but they would not outgrow the eukaryote clade. So it's akin to a tree. if you want to picture it that way. It's akin to how a tree grows. Branches grow from other branches, but they don't outgrow their branches. Well, unless you grow them.
Well, I strongly disagree. I think there's a tree of humans. I think we all had a common ancestor named Adam and Eve. I don't think that would prove humans came from an amoeba, or humans are related to pigs or birds. There's probably thousands of trees, but they're not connected. The humans are probably all connected. There's different skin color, different eye color, different hair color, different tall people, short people, wide people, skinny people.
See, I'm going to go for, put him on the defense because, he's making the statement they are not connected. So he needs to back that up. And there's no way he can. Like, he just expects us to have the burden of proof and that he can just declare the opposite because, he has doubts.
Yeah. The reason why I didn't really put him too much on the defense because the title of the debate is kind of where I am the one that's supposed to provide the evidence. It's not like creation versus evolution. It's a more evolutionists show what you got kind of thing, So that's why I didn't try to put him on the defense here. But if, say if the title of the debate was creation versus evolution, yeah, he'd be on the fence in the entire debate.
Yeah.
Like anything he says, you'd have to define it.
Well, that's my opening's gonna provide a bunch of evidence, and then the tactic from there is just to say, okay, I've met the standard of beyond reasonable doubt. All you can show are unreasonable doubts, and that's how I put him back on the defensive, even though I'm technically the one who's supposed to be providing evidence.
They're still human, all incapable of interbreeding, but they're still human. That's not evolution. There are no examples of this tree you're talking about connecting what anybody would consider wildly different kinds. Let's take, here they got the human and the fly off to the right, okay? The human and the fly go back to a common ancestor. I don't think that's science. Do you believe you're related to a fly, Mike?
Ultimately, all eukaryotic life is related, so yes, I would be related to a fly. What I'm saying is, if you want to understand how humans are related to other organisms, you can't start from animal A and then look at animal Z and then try to connect them. You need to look at humans and then the ones closest to them and then the ones closest to them, and then you get a picture of what's going on. That's how you build puzzles, for example. You don't go, I'm going to choose this piece and then the furthest piece and try to get the picture. You try to build some, at least patches of it, using the closest pieces, and then you get a picture of what's going on, and then you continue building around that and you build around that until you get the entire picture, right? So it makes no sense even attempting to show how humans are related to flies if we're not going to talk about how humans, Homo sapiens, are related to Neanderthals and Denisovans and those closely related organisms that we classify with Homo sapiens.
Yeah, that was perfectly well put, I think, right there.
Yeah, he's just trying to look at the two most distinct organisms you can think of in his head, because you realize it's just random, right? So you're just randomly thinking of two distinct organisms and say, how are those related? You wouldn't understand it if you keep ignoring the organisms in between, and there's a lot in between. So let's start at a point, and then let's go to the ones close to them and close to them, so you get a kind of idea. And that's the reason why biologists specialize in specific areas. You don't hear evolutionary biologists saying he knows all the tree of life. He does usually a primatologist or someone who studies butterflies or dragonflies or some specific type of plant or whatever. So they usually kind of specialize so they can understand what they're studying instead of trying to look at two distantly related organisms and try to patch them together.
Yeah.
Well, my objection is the kids in school are taught with charts just like this from a public school textbook, or this one, that everything has a common ancestor. That is not observable science. That could be, there are 64 different varieties of herons, the big, huge bird. We got a family of them lives here on one of our lakes. Those 64 herons might have had a common ancestor, I'll grant you that. But that doesn't prove herons are related to pickles.
But they're taught that because the science is showing that herons are closely related to some other bird, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
There are 4,000 varieties of potatoes now, most of them cultivated by man for some particular reason. Sweet potatoes, big potatoes, little potatoes, I don't know. But they might have had a common ancestor. I wouldn't argue about that. But does that therefore prove that if we went long enough, the potatoes came eventually from an amoeba and have a relationship with a bird? This is why I think it's a mental illness to believe these charts they put in the textbook. Here we have birds and dinosaurs and worms and sharks and clams. There are so many differences between these things. It's mind-boggling. And
yeah, his whole argument is, look how different they are. And that's it. And he doesn't want to acknowledge that there are ways to bridge those differences.
Yeah, because he keeps looking at like the two most distinct organisms you can think of. You would never get the picture that way. He's never going to understand it that way, and he's deliberately doing that so he just doesn't understand. So,
yeah.
To imagine that they gradually change. Okay, I understand. I admire your faith, but it's not science. We don't observe it. And the purpose of this debate, the title, is for you to provide evidence, reasonable evidence, for evolution. Not just saying it might happen, it could happen, maybe it did, well, it must have happened because here we are. Where's the scientific evidence of an amoeba producing what anybody in the world would consider a non-amoeba? Has a cow ever produced anything somebody would say, oh, that's not a cow anymore? Ask any farmer on the planet. Our donkey had a baby this morning. It turned out to be a baby donkey. Wow, who'd have thunk it? And it always will, no exceptions.
Let me jump in, Emo, just before you respond. Gentlemen, as always, these discussions are so enjoyable. And this one especially has been very intelligent, lots of great topics discussed. Time is flying by. Emo, since we do have a ton of audience questions, is there one final line of evidence you wanted to bring up, one final question you wanted to ask Dr. Dino? Because I see about a minute and a half on the discussion portion from my timer. So, of course, respond to that. And then maybe one final point or one final question that you really want to get out before the discussion ends. Go ahead.
Okay. Also, I wanted to ask, are cherries distinct from, I don't know, almonds? Or do you think cherries are distinct from almonds?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't have a quick answer. I'm willing to study it. Almonds don't have a fruit that we consider. Man has decided to divide the plants into those that have fruit surrounding a seed and those that just have a seed or a shell surrounding the seed, a non-edible shell. So I'm not sure how they classify cherries and almonds, but I'd be willing to bet you $50 the cherry's not related to the pig. That I would bet you.
Do you know that cherries and almonds are classified together with peaches within the same kind?
I don't think they care how we classify them. Man is always trying to put things into classification systems. We put our screwdrivers together and put our wrenches together and our hammers together. I don't think the tool cares.
Yeah, so he's just dodging the point again. That you can see these things are closely related, and you expand the circle and soon enough, you have things that seem so different that they couldn't be related at first. But there's a whole spectrum between them.
Right. And the thing is, it's strange how he has to think if, cherries are noticeably distinct from almonds. No one thinks about that question. They're distinct. I can distinguish between them easily. But he has to think because he knows. I think he kind of gets how I ask my questions. So he's kind of careful on how we answer them. Okay, I'm not going to really answer that question. So I'm going to pretend that I don't know, and go for two more distantly related organisms. Let me find two more random organisms I can think of.
Yeah.
I don't think the cherry tree cares. The fact that we decided to put it with something else, okay, I don't think the tree cares. Cherry trees only produce baby cherries that grow up to be cherry trees again. That I know. They're never going to produce an almond.
Well, yeah, but why are they classified within the same kind of? Actually, they could graft. It's possible for cherries to graft to almonds and peaches.
Yeah, as I showed you, the definition of species, let's see, 36. The definition of species has been changing. It's still changing. What is the definition of species? Nobody knows. There are 7 distinct definitions of the word species. So is a cherry and an almond different species? Oh, certainly. Are they the same kind? I don't think so.
He's probably including in there the chemical definition of species as well, because that's also used. I don't think he probably ever looked into that.
Yeah, I don't think they understand that there are different definitions because there are different contexts they're being used in.
Different fields of science.
Yeah, so obviously you're going to have different definitions. You can't have one definition of this apply to every different context. I don't think they understand that.
Yeah, it's like saying, well, there's two different definitions of protein. One is used in cooking, and the other is used in biochemistry. So the scientists can't decide what protein means.
Are they in the same kingdom? Well, yeah, they're plant kingdom.
No,
Same class.
they're classified as the same kind because of their grafting compatibility. Grafting compatibility is a criteria used to classify kinds, just as pollinating compatibility and sexual compatibility in animals, right? So
Cherry,
that's
wait a minute. Cherry and almond can be grafted together. They might be. Is that true? Okay. Can you graft a cherry onto a giraffe?
no, they're too far. removed.
Okay. Well, there's two that are different kind.
All right, let me jump.
So if that's his standard, then that opens a whole can of worms.
Right. So basically, if they can't graft, they're a different kind.
Yeah.
When they're organisms within the same kind that can't graft too. So I don't know.
Yeah, try grafting a new arm onto yourself.
Jump in here, gentlemen. This has been a great discussion, and as always in the live chat, we've got a great chat with some side debates and some side, just a lot of fun going on. So great debate.
All right, well, that was the discussion portion of the debate. Yeah, it's about time for me to head off to work. Maybe we can tackle the discussion questions another time, but yeah, was there anything, any concluding thoughts you had?
Not much. I mean, like retroactively, like looking at the debate, I think I could have been a bit more aggressive, but I was trying not to be. My approach was, let me try to explain the things that Ken doesn't understand in the most simple ways that I could. Right? Not trying to be like aggressive or abrasive or whatever. And like that approach doesn't even work. So I don't know. I don't even know what would work to get through the Ken some of the things we're trying to explain to him, because I use the simplest analogies, the simplest examples of things that he might be able to understand, but for some reason I see myself keep repeating over and over. I'm like, Jesus Christ, can he not understand what I just told him like 2 minutes ago? Yeah, so I don't know. I guess we'll probably, I don't know what tactic what approach you'd use during your debate until I see it. So you'd have to wait for that.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's not going to be exactly the same thing. Like, I want to know the same questions, basically. I think I'm going to go more with, like, trying to hold his feet to the fire. Like, how do you know there's a limitation? Because we've established this range of variation. Now tell me what the limitation is. Because, yeah, I mean, either way, I don't think you're going to get anywhere with Kent.
Nah, I don't have any confidence that we're going to get anywhere with him.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, at least we can try. And I like that like people acknowledge that Kent didn't understand what I was saying in the comment section. He was just not getting it. I mean, some creations wasn't getting it too, but like people could see that Kent wasn't getting it. And like I explained how clades work. Very simple, using a very simple analogy. And like there were people telling me that they understood it, but for some reason Ken couldn't do it. So,
yeah, and if you can put the question in people's heads and they try to answer it, that's pretty much as we can hope for, right?
Right. So it's tonight, right?
Tomorrow night.
Debate.
Yeah.
Tomorrow night.
Yeah,
Okay.
Thursday at
Tomorrow night. Okay.
8 p.m. Eastern.
All
Yeah.
right.
I might be.
I would have to watch it like afterwards.
Yeah, I might be simultaneously streaming. We'll see how that goes. I don't know if my internet can handle it.
Oh,
But yeah,
I think I see Tom Jump does that kind of simultaneous streaming and
yeah,
debating at the same
yeah.
time. Yeah.
Well, all right, man. It was fun. It's been a long time. It was good catching up and, doing another collab.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to get a little more frequent on YouTube from now on.
Yeah. And I think you make some of
Yeah.
the best slides out there for educating creationists. So, yeah.
I used to teach for a bit, so it came from that. So I like making I think like showing people what you're saying gets it in their head a bit better than just saying it. Because if I talk about two organisms, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you won't be able to picture it in your head. So I think it's best that you kind of show what you're talking about. It helps a lot,
Yeah. Especially with these guys.
especially with these guys.
Well, all right, man. Thanks for coming on. And feel free to mirror this or anything you want.
Yeah, I might put it up in a week or two.
Okay.
Let it get some views on your channel and then a grain of salt.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks again for having me, and have yourself a good day and a good debate tomorrow, man.
Yeah. I'll see you on the flip side. Side up.
All right. All right. You go sight up. Later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thanks to everyone who watched, and we'll see you later. God bless.